Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph. Unfortunately, we had a few days of absence without the share, but now Baruch Hashem, we're back on schedule. So we're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and we have to complete Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, and I'm going to try to make at least a dent in Pei Gimel Amud Beis. So we do have quite a bit of work ahead of us. So we're continuing to learn Hilchos Berachos HaShachar. We're in Siman Nun Gimel. We began Sif Yud Tes. Now the first halacha in Sif Yud Tes was really a stand-alone halacha. That's on Pei Gimel Amud Aleph in the Mechaber, 4 lines from the bottom at the end of the line. Yesh Mainim Ger Milihiyos Shliach Tzibur V'nitchu Divrayim. The Mechaber said that there are those that refrained from appointing a ger, a convert, as a chazan, and the Mechaber himself says v'nidchu divreihem, that we don't agree with that opinion. And the Mishnah Berurah told us that this had to do with the idea that a ger cannot say Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu because his forefathers were not Jewish. But the Mishnah Berurah says in the end we say that indeed he can say Aviseinu, and it was a very fascinating idea because he is considered to be offspring of Avraham Avinu, because Avraham Avinu was the Av Hamoin Goyim. The pasuk refers to Avraham Avinu as not only a father of Klal Yisrael, but a father of many nations. And since ultimately every ger is considered to have been inspired to come to his gerus by a connection to Avraham Avinu, he could indeed say Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu, and therefore he can serve as a shliach tzibbur. That was the first halacha in Sif Yud Tes. Now we continue in Sif Yud Tes when the Mechaber says Afilu Yachid Yachal La'akev. Even a single individual in a tzibbur could be ma'akev. He could protest against somebody being named as a shliach tzibbur, and his protest carries weight. And not only does it carry weight, his protest can effectively prevent the tzibbur from appointing a certain individual as a shliach tzibbur. We're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah that we don't paskin that way nowadays, but this is what the Mechaber says. Again, afilu yachid, even a single individual, yachal akev, he could protest and prevent v'loymar, and he could say, Eini roitze shaploini yi achazin, I don't want that this individual should be named as a chazan, and then they cannot name him. And we're going to see the reason for this is also a fascinating reason. As we've already mentioned several times, we all know the concept unishalma parim sifasenu, that our lips, the utterances of our lips, our verbalized tefillah, stands in place of parim. It stands in place of the behemoths, the animals that were brought as karbanos, as sacrifices on the Mizbeach. And we know that one of the primary halachos in kachim of a carbon is that a person brings a carbon, that carbon has to be sacrificed with the das of the bailim, with the das of the owners of the carbon who are giving the carbon. So the same way, somebody who's bringing a carbon, right, it has to be brought with his knowledge and his intent and his agreement. So too the sfasenu, the tefillah that stands in place of the karbanos, the shliach tzibur, who's the shliach of each individual in the tzibur, he can only present the tefillah to Shamayim on behalf of the tzibur if he has agreement of the tzibur. And every member of the tzibur has a chelik in that tefillah. So even one single individual could protest and say, I don't want that person to be my shliach. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah is cut nun aleph. Yachal la'akev be'es hismanus. At the time that they are going to appoint the shliach tzibur, at that point in time, even a single individual could protest. V'atam, and the reason for this is sharei atfilos b'mkayim hatmidim tiknum. We know that the davening every day, shacharis, mincha, those were established instead of the carbon tamid, the tamid shel shachar and the tamid shel bein harbayim. The Chol Yisrael yesh lehem chelik batmidim. Every single individual in Klal Yisrael had a chelik in the carbon tamid. Every member of Klal Yisrael gave a shekel, gave a machzis hashekel, once a year, and that Machzas HaShekel purchased his chelik in the karbonos tzibbur, including the timidim. Umi yuchal hakriv karbonos shaloi midaitoi. A person's carbon cannot be brought out without his das. So therefore, the shliach tzibbur, the davening that stands instead of the carbon timidim, can't be done without the knowledge and the agreement of each member of the tzibbur. Imloi shekvar hiskim alav, unless the shliach tzibbur was already appointed. If the shliach tzibbur was already appointed, then it's too late. Va'oz ein yachid v'gam chatzi hakol yechayla lahaviroi. At that point, once the chazan is already appointed, at that point, not only cannot a single member of the kehillah protest, even 50%, even half of the tzibur, cannot remove him from his position. And this is true even if they agreed to pay out his contract. In other words, let's say the shliach tzibur was contracted for a year, and now 50% of the tzibur wants to remove him from his shteller. And they come and they say, look, we'll pay out your contract. Doesn't matter. You cannot remove him from his position, since he didn't do anything improper. In other words, the protest over here is not that this person is not worthy of being a chazan. That's not the protest. The protest is, I don't want him to be a chazan. I don't like him. I don't want him to be a chazan. So at the point where he has not yet been appointed, before his appointment, even a single member of the kehillah could protest and say, I don't want him. I don't want him to be my shliach. But once he's appointed, not only can one member not do that, even 50% of the kehillah can't do it, even if they agree to pay out his contract, because he didn't do anything wrong, so you can't remove him from his position. However, roiv hakahal yechayla lahaviroi, a majority of the kehillah, they could remove him from his position im noistiv loischar mishalem, if they pay out his contract. However, now come very key words to the Mishnah Berurah that apply to a lot of what we've been learning here. Va'akshav, nowadays, harishus laha'aviroi, the permission and the authority to remove a chazan from his position, rak biyad shiva tuvei ha'ir ayahanivrarim, that authority nowadays rests only with the shiva tuvei ha'ir, the 7 trustees or representatives of the tzibur, ayahanivrarim, or to those individuals who were specifically appointed by the tzibur to handle the matter of the shluchei tzibur. Kamakim umakim l'fiyat takana, each kehillah and each place according to their protocols that they set in place. Now the shiva tuvei ha'ir, this is already mentioned in Rishonim, maybe even earlier than Rishonim. The shiva tuvei ha'ir, these were like, I guess you would call them a board, maybe a board of trustees or a board of directors. I don't know what you would call them. The shiva tuvei ha'ir were 7 people who were appointed to oversee matters pertaining to the tzibur. Now, what's the difference if there was shiva tuvei ha'ir or there were less than shiva tuvei ha'ir? So what's brought down is, if the tzibur appointed 7 members, shiva tuvei ha'ir, to oversee matters pertaining to the tzibur, then they are authorized to act on all matters that pertain to the tzibur. So even if the issue of the shluchei tzibur was not specifically given over to these shiva tuvei ha'ir, since they are the shiva tuvei ha'ir, they are the apotropsin. They are the ones who have, so to speak, like the power of attorney. They are authorized to act as if they are the tzibur. So the shluchei tzibur is a tzibur shazach. It's something that the tzibur has to deal with. The shiva tuvei ha'ir are authorized to act on behalf of the tzibur, even though this wasn't specifically named as one of the issues that they're going to deal with. If you don't have shiva tuvei ha'ir, if you have, let's say, individual gabayim, then each gabbai could act on the issues that they were specifically authorized to act on, but they can't pick up additional issues to deal with. So that's the difference. The shiva tuvei ha'ir, they are considered the tzibur. They're always authorized to act on behalf of the tzibur. Okay, Eis Katan Beis. Even one person could say, Eini roitze, I don't want this person. V'davka sheyesh le'atzibur achar sheyuchel hakol haskirei b'damav. The Mishnah Berurah points out a caveat over here. When the Mechaber says that back in the day, even a single individual could protest and stop the tzibbur from naming this person, that's only if there's another candidate for the job who's willing to do it for the same money. But if you can't find another candidate, or you have another candidate, but that second candidate wants more money, then the tzibbur could look at this one individual who's protesting against the first candidate, and they could say, look, this fellow's willing to do the job for $10,000 a year. If we don't take him, the only other candidate, and the only candidate that you're willing to agree to, wants $15,000, then Elahu Yosef Mishalai. If you want to pick up the extra $5,000, fine, we'll take candidate number 2 and we'll pay him $15,000. But if you're not willing to pick up the other $5,000, the tzibbur is not picking up the other $5,000 because of your protest. And that's true, even if they will find out that the second person is a nicer chazan. Doesn't matter. And he's worth the extra $5,000. The tzibbur has the right to turn around and say, listen, it's out of the budget. We budgeted $10,000 a year for a shliach tzibbur. You want to stop us from using this fellow. You want us to use somebody who's going to charge $15,000, and it's true. He's worth $15,000. Fine, you pay the extra $5,000. It's beyond our budget. We're not doing it. This person is protesting against this individual being the chazan. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is not only talking about a chazan. This pertains to all sorts of appointments over the tzibbur. A person can be moichid and say, I don't want this individual. Now this is interesting, because earlier the Mishnah Berurah said the reason an individual could protest against the chazan is because the chazan is acting as his shliach. I have a chelik in the tefillah. I don't want this person to represent me with my tefillahs. Over here, now suddenly the Mishnah Berurah says this halacha applies to all sorts of appointments, not only shluchei tzibur. Afilu b'chacham marbitz Torah, even somebody to say shiurim in the shul, which is very interesting. Why? What is that based on? The Mishnah Berurah doesn't explain. V'dafka kisharoitz alakabel acher. However, this is only when this individual says, I don't want this maggid chair, but I want a different maggid chair. But if somebody will get up and say, I don't want it to be a maggid chair. I don't want the shul to have a maggid chair. Then it's obvious that his protest is worthless. And in that case, even a minority of the kehillah could force the majority of the kehillah to establish something like a maggid chair. And even if they just want to appoint somebody else, if the person that the majority of the kehillah wants, who adif mizeh, is, let's say, a better maggid chair, in that case, the minority cannot protest. And it could be that even the miut could force, even the minority could force the majority to pay somebody who's better. Again, the Achrayim say that this halacha that the Shulchan Aruch is bringing down was only back in the day. But nowadays, where it's well known, nowadays there are a lot of people who are just interested in making a machlokes. And when they're protesting against the chazan, or they're protesting against the rav, or they're protesting against the maggid chair, it's not l'shem shamayim. If we would have to poll and ask every member of the shul their opinion on each appointment, whether it's over the chazan, or whether it's over a maggid chair, or when it comes to appointing an av bezdin, or any such appointments, you would never reach an agreement. You're never going to find nowadays a unanimous decision to appoint somebody. There's always going to be somebody who's going to make trouble. Therefore, we go after the majority of the people who actually pay the membership dues. And even if there are relatives that would be possible edus, it doesn't matter. Each person who pays gets a vote. And nowadays, the minig is again, we go after the Shuva Tuvei, the board, or after the search committee that was appointed by the tzibbur. And the main thing is that chas v'chalila this should not be machlokes. And we don't worry about the opinions of individuals. The Magen Avram gives another reason why nowadays we don't have to worry about the opinion of a yachid when it comes to the appointment of a shliach tzibur. Because the logic, the rationale for why a yachid should be able to protest against a shliach tzibur was dafka bizmanehem. It only applied back in the day when the shliach tzibur was actually being moitzi people in his davening. And back then, one person could protest and stop the tzibur from appointing that person. Why? Because then somebody has a right to say, look, he's davening the tefillah on my behalf. He's being moitzi me. So his tefillah is my tefillah. I don't want him to be the one who's my shliach to take my tefillah to Shemayim. But nowadays we all daven on our own. What's the shliach tzibur for? To say the piyutim out loud, etc., etc. But he's not being moitzi us in the tefillah. Even though he does say Kadesh, Baruch Hu, Kedusha, ain't kol kach peda. On that, there's not so much of a peda that somebody should be able to say, I don't want him to be my shliach. The idea that somebody says, I don't want this shliach tzibur to be my shliach, that's mainly by the tefillah, where he's bringing your tefillah up to Shemayim. Then I have a right to protest. I don't want this individual bringing my tefillah up to Shemayim. But nowadays, says the Magen Avram, that's not negeya. Now let's go weiter here in the Mechaber over here in Sif Yotes. So he said, Afilu yachid yachal akiv v'loimer any roitz that shaplein yachazin. And now 2 lines from the bottom, near the beginning of the line. Im loi shekvar hiskim alav b'tchila. Unless they already appointed him. In other words, if they already agreed on chazan and appointed a chazan, now an individual can't protest anymore. Let's say they gave a chazan a 2-year contract, and now the 2 years are up. So now the chazan is coming, he wants to re-up his contract. Loi mikri hiskim alav b'tchila. That does not constitute that he already has a job, and therefore a yachid can no longer protest. Da'akshav heavy kabbalah chadasha. Now that his contract is up for renewal, it's as if we're appointing him again from scratch. Ukilu lo hayasham adayin, and it's as if he was never there. But again, nowadays it's not negeya. V'ayin masha kasavdu b'say sifkatan hakoidim. But take a look at the previous sifkatan, says the Mishnah Berurah, that nowadays it's not negeya. Ruvain shayish shliach tzibur schir shana v'hishlim shnasai. Let's say you have a fellow, Ruvain, he had a year contract, and now his year is up. V'hischel lehispalel yomim mispar me'ashana achadasha. Like, unfortunately, happens too often. Somebody had a contract. The contract was up. But nobody got around to bringing up the question of whether or not the contract should be renewed. So, in the absence of a new contract, the chazan continued his shteller, and he kept davening for the Amud. So now the new year started, and maybe the chazan davened Musaf on both days Rosh Hashanah, albeit without a contract. Now somebody wants to go protest about his contract being re-upped. So now the chazan comes with a taina, and the chazan says, look, I'm already on year 2. So now that means you by default, you re-upped me for year 2, and now Yachid can't protest. Says the Mishnah Berurah, so that was the case. He already started davening for the Yomid several days into the period of the new contract. And now some people are protesting, and they're saying, the old contract is up. Listen, we couldn't protest for the last year because he was already on the contract. But now his contract is up, and now we're protesting because we learned the halacha that when there's a question of a contract coming up for renewal, that's like an initial appointment. And by an initial appointment, even a yachid has a right to protest. So we're protesting. Vashak tzibbur tan, and the chazan is tining, he's claiming, Shemayach shekvar hischil hispalel b'hayomim noiroim shehem me'ashana chadasha v'loy me'anu boy. The chazan is saying, look, I already davened Musaf both days Rosh Hashanah, and nobody stopped me. Nobody came over to me and said, no. You're not davening Rosh Hashanah because your contract is up for renewal, and we haven't renewed the contract. No, nobody did that. I went and I davened Rosh Hashanah both days Musaf without a renewal on the contract. But once I started, so l'chayra, I'm now in year 2 of the contract. It's like by default I was re-upped. And what he's saying is, look, you want me to stop? Pay out year 2. So now pay out the rest of my contract for the second year. Pasuk b'tshuvas mishpat tzedek tahadinam shliach tzibbur. The Shalos of Tshuvas Mishpat Tzedek says that the shliach tzibbur is right. He says, look, you had the benefit of me davening already both days Rosh Hashanah, and nobody came and said a word about my contract. It's as if by default you accepted my contract. You want to get rid of me? You got to pay out my contract. Ayin leket hakemach yeridei amud aleph. Okay. Nun hey tuvei ir the shiva tuvei ir ritzona loymar sheyitzia lifneim eze inyan. No, I think we didn't do this yet. No, this is the Ramah. Says the Ramah 2 lines from the bottom near the end of the line. Hagah. Says the Ramah, this that we're saying that even a Yachid could protest, the dafke sheyeh la'oisa Yachid tam hogun al pi tuvei ir. When we say that a Yachid could protest, that's only if he brings a valid protest to the board. But without a valid taina, he can't just come and say, I don't want him. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting nun hey, tuvei ir, return loymar. What the Ramah wants to say is, sheitzil ifneim eze inyan, where this Yachid came to the board and he gave them epis a taina, that he's coming and basing on something why I don't want him. He has to come and say, look, I don't want this guy to be the shliach on my behalf. He's not a Bal Midos, he's a Bal Gaiva, he's a Kaisen, he's always getting into fights with people, I don't know. But epis a taina he has to have. V'loy tainas psul. But not to come and say he's puzzle. He has one of the things that render him puzzle to be a shliach tzibur. The bazel kuliyama ein yachid yachalimcha is called man shalei birer ki yesh lachash lepgamay. You zika can't puzzle up the fellow from being a shliach tzibur based on the protest of one person, because then the guy will never get a job. I mean, you're mamish destroying his umnus. If you're going to accept the protest of one person to make him puzzled to be a shliach tzibur, right? You'll come and you'll say he's an over avera. He's machal Shabbos. You know, one of the things that we saw over here in the beginning of the Siman, and you'll say that there's something about him that he's mamish puzzled to be a shliach tzibur. You can't accept the word of one person for that. You'll destroy the man's livelihood. Says the Ramah Viter, top line, Pei Gimel Amud Beis, last word on the line. Umi shehu sainei l'shliach tzibur, if somebody, no, I'm sorry, I got to go back to Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, the last 2 words of the Ramah on Pei Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Ramah, v'im hu sainei, If a person will say that, listen, the reason I'm protesting against the shliach tzibbur is everybody knows we hate each other. We had a major falling out over a shidduch or over a business deal or what have you, and he's a sainei. I don't want him to be the shliach tzibbur. He's not going to be moitzi me in the tefillah. Then yachal limchais by kaidim shehiskim alav. Then indeed he could protest as long as they have not yet appointed him. Aizkat nonvav sainai. What the Ramah means to say is sheyadua be'emes mikvar shein sainim zelazeh. That's true if everybody knows, oh yeah, these two don't get along. Lakach yachal limchais by. Based on that, this person could protest. Because again, I don't want him to be my shliach. Yeah. But if he just comes and says, yeah, I can't stand the guy, and nobody ever heard that these two people ever had anything to do with each other, nobody knows that there's any kind of katata between them, and he's just coming mitabal, and he's saying, oh, yeah, I don't want him to be a shliach because we have a long-standing feud. That you don't accept. He could protest before they appoint him. But let's say they accept the shliach tzibur and they appoint him and they give him a 2-year contract. And 6 months into the contract, the shliach tzibur has a major falling out with one member of the kehillah, and now this member of the kehillah comes and says, listen, I'm protesting. I don't want him to be the shliach tzibur. He hates me. I don't want him to be a shliach for my tefillah. So it's happening after he was already appointed. Su eina yachad yachal limchais. Then the yachid cannot protest. Even though it's bona fide, it's legitimate. They really do have a problem with each other. But the problem arose after the shliach tzibur was already appointed. Ella, in such a case, says the Mishnah Berurah, HaShliach tzibur mechoyev loymar beferish. The shliach tzibur has to go and state unequivocally and clearly sheyaser akinam milibai, that he will remove any hatred or any ill will towards that person from his heart when he's davening for the Yamid, the Yotzienu b'tfilasei, and he's going to be mitzi him in the davening. Gam im mechavin shaloi l'hotzi asaynei, and you should know, says the Mishnah Berurah, if a shliach tzibur goes up to the Yamid and he has in mind not to be mitzi somebody who he doesn't like, gam oyahavim lo yotzu, nobody in the tzibur is yotzei. So you have a tzibur with 250 people, and the shliach tzibur has it in for one guy. So he has in mind, I'm not being yotzei Menachem Mendel over there in his tefillas. Nobody in the tzibur is going to be yotzei. And the Mefarshim explain this, and they say, because your authority, your standing as a shliach tzibur is based on the idea that you're going to be mitzi everybody. If you're not willing to be mitzi everybody, then you cease to have the standing of a shliach tzibur. And then even the people that you want to be mitzi in the tefillah are not going to be yotzei. Al-Kain, therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, Tzrichem ha-chazanim lizar bazeh. The shluchei tzibur, the chazanim, have to be very careful about this. And they have to make sure that they don't have in mind that they're not being mitzi anybody. If there's even one person that they have in mind not to be mitzi, they're not mitzi the entire tzibur. Kasav Darkei Moshe, the Ramah writes in the Darkei Moshe on the Torah, B'Shem Ar Zeruah, in the name of the other Zeruah, Ein shliach tzibur tzarich lahachanif latzibur mimili d'shmaya. You know, we're hearing a lot over here about the need for the shliach tzibur to be merutza l'kahal. The shliach tzibur has to be somebody that everybody gets along with, and that he doesn't have any strife with anybody in the kehillah. So you might think maybe Pashut, the person who's going to be the shliach tzibur, he has to be mechanef. He has to, to use the colloquial expression, which I don't think is such a nice expression, so you'll pardon me if it's a little crude, but just to use the colloquial expression, don't think that the person who's going to be the shliach tzibur has to kiss up to everybody, right? That he has to make sure that he's going to be on great terms with everybody, and afilu b'mili d'shmaya. So there's a raging machloikis in the shul, whether or not there should be a daf yomi shir. And there are people who are saying, oh, I don't want a Daf Yomi share in the shul. Whoever heard of such a thing? So, but maybe the shliach tzibbur, maybe he has to be Mr. Nice Guy. And he has to get along even with the people who don't want a Daf Yomi share. So he has to say, yeah, I hear, maybe you have a good taina, maybe Daf Yomi is not such a great idea. People learn up so fast, maybe they don't really know anything. Yeah, I hear. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. So he brings down from the Ramah in the Dakei Moshe, ain't shliach tzibbur tzarich lahachnif la tzibbur b'mili d'shmaya. He doesn't have to, make sure he's on the good side of everybody in the Kehillah, even by mili d'shmaya, even with things that are negeya to shamayim. Adarabba, v'tzarich la yichichan. He has to reprimand them. If the tzibur is doing something wrong, that even the one who's been appointed to be a shliach tzibbur has to be willing to say, no, you can't talk in shul. He has to, but what? He can't start up with anybody. They're not going to like him. They're not going to want him to be the shliach tzibur. No. If it's mili d'shmaya, then adarabba, he taka has to take the side of shamayim. He has to take the side that halacha demands. And he can. Ach b'inyanei atzmai, when it has to do with things that are negayah to him personally, Yira lahavra amidosav via of lakol. That's when he has to be ma'ivra amidosav. That's when he has to give up on his own covet, etc., and he has to make sure that he's marutza lakol. So if somebody is starting up with him personally, then he has to train himself to look away. But mili d'shmaya, he could protest. Okay, now we go weiter in the Ramah, top line, Pei Gimel Amud Bey's last word on the line. Umishu saynei l'shliach tzibur. Somebody who unfortunately is hated by the shliach tzibur, and right now, but when we're using the word shliach tzibur, the Ramah means specifically the Bal Koreh, the one who lanes. Somebody, he knows that the Bal Koreh has it in for him. The Bal Koreh hates him. So, Miyashu Sainei l'shliach tzibur, somebody who is a Sainei of the shliach tzibur, meaning the shliach tzibur hates him, the Bal Koreh hates him, Lo yala l'sefer Torah, he should not get an aliyah by the sefer Torah, kishekare hatoichecha, when the Bal Koreh is going to be laning the toichecha. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Ches. Sainei l'shliach tzibur. It's an alarmar. What the Ramah wants to say is, Kevin shu sainei l'shliach tzibur, since the Bal Koreh hates him, mistama shliach tzibur gam kein eino oyhava. No, it means the other way. The words sainei l'shliach tzibur means if somebody hates the Bal Koreh. So literally, what the Ramah is saying is, if Ruvain is a member of the Kehillah, and Shimon is the Bal Koreh, and Ruvain hates Shimon, Ruvain hates the Bal Koreh, then Ruvain should make sure not to get an aliyah by the Toichecha. Explains the Mishnah Berurah why. Ritzaina Loimar, Kevan shu sainei l'shliach tzibur, since Ruvain hates the Bal Koreh, mistama shliach tzibur gam kein einoi oyhavoi. Mistama, that means that the Bal Koreh also doesn't like him. If he doesn't like the Bal Koreh, then you could assume that the Bal Koreh doesn't like him. Why? Ki kamayim panim lepanim ke'leva adam la'adam. Famous pasuk in Mishlei, where Shlomo HaMelech says that the heart of a person is like a mirror. The same way kamayim panim lepanim, the same way water reflects your face back at you. When you look in the mirror, you see yourself. Kein lev ha'adam ela adam. So too the heart of a person is also like a mirror. A person's heart reflects what's coming from you. If you don't like him, then that person will not like you. Therefore, says the Ramah, if you hate the Bal Koreh, then Pashtus, the Bal Koreh probably hates you. And since the Bal Koreh hates you, make sure you don't get an aliyah by the Toichecha. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, V'ula yechavin shliach tzibur al Koreh ba Toichecha neged panov. You have to be worried that when the Bal Koreh reads the Toichecha, the terrible klolos, the curses of the Toichecha, he might be reading them and directing them at the person who got the aliyah. And says the Mishnah Berurah, Chash sakana hiloi. That would be a chash sakana. It's like the Bal Koreh is cursing him. Al ken pasak, and therefore the Bechara paskins, the mipnei zeh afilu kra'u lo yala. And therefore, even if they do call him up for an aliyah, he shouldn't go. So you have over here two different opinions. You have one opinion that if you have to worry that the Baal Kari hates you, you shouldn't get the aliyah by the teichacha, and even if they call you up for the aliyah, you should not go, because it's a kshash sakana. But then you have the shita of the Knesset Agdola and of the Gra that no, if they call you up, you should go. Because if they call you up for an aliyah and you don't go, that's a bezayin HaTorah. And there's a much greater risk that comes together with bezayin HaTorah than the risk of going up to the Sefer Torah and having the Baal Kara laying the psukim of the Teichacha with the risk that maybe they're being directed at you yourself. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, v'chein kasa b'Sefer Shari Ephraim v'zel l'shoinai. So too, this is what's written in the Sefer Shari Ephraim. Tzarich sheyia ohov la-tzibbur v'hu oyhavam. The Baal Koreh has to be somebody who is beloved by the tzibbur, and he has to love the tzibbur as well. If it turns out that the Baal Koreh has something with one of the members of the Kehillah, there's a hatred between the Baal Koreh and another member of the Kehillah, then mutal ala skan shelo yitzav likrois lazel parshat tochicha. Then the skan, the gabbai, should make sure not to ask this person to lay in the tochicha. Now, if you find yourself in a position where you know the Baal Koreh hates you, and you came into shul and guess what, he's laning, and you don't want to risk getting an aliyah with this guy laning the teichacha, you should go out between the aliyahs to make sure that the gabbai doesn't call you up. Until they call up somebody else for the aliyah, then you'll go back in. So now you just effectively made sure that you don't get the aliyah of the teichacha. Now, v'im lo yotza. Now let's say he didn't go out; he stayed in shul. Ukra'u, and they called him up for an aliyah. Yale, he should go. He should go and get the aliyah. Kevichu miskavim mishum kavod HaTorah, because since he's going up to take the aliyah because of kavod HaTorah, shemer mitzvah lo yeda davara, he won't come to any bad because of the decision, and it'll be okay. The Mishnah Berurah does make sure to tell us that it is incumbent upon the Baal Koreh to realize that he is not allowed to bear any ill will when he's laning something like the teichacha, and have in mind that the klalos of the teichacha should go on that person. Ayin Sham. Because of a pisei sharim daf lamag and avram yalib di'evet im kara'uhu. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time, Yos Hashem, with Sif Chaf. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be Megan, Agas Klal Yisrael, the Rebbe Shem should send Yeshua Serfuas Parnasset Sheduchim to all those in need, and we should be zakeh to see the Bias Kol Tzedek B'Meherav Yameinu Amen.